Tributes continue to pour in to Pope Francis, who died this morning at age 88. His 12-year papacy is being remembered for ushering in a more open and welcoming Catholic Church and making history here in Canada when Pope Francis apologized for the Church's role in the residential school system. This is Power and Politics. I'm David Cochrane in Ottawa. We will get to our coverage of the federal election in just a little bit, but this is an extraordinary day on so many levels. In just a moment, Phil Fontaine, former National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, will join us to talk about the Pope's legacy in Canada. But first, Canada's political leaders reacted to the news on the campaign trail today. Here is some of what they had to say.
Pope Francis was a voice of moral clarity, spiritual courage, and boundless compassion. He was, in many respects, the world's conscience, never hesitating to challenge the powerful on behalf of the vulnerable.
There have been countless millions of Catholics and non-Catholics that have been inspired by his leadership in faith and other domains.
I think he's done a lot of things that were inspirational. I think the fact that he came to Canada and apologized for the harms done by the Catholic Church to the Indigenous communities was a really powerful example of his leadership as Pope.
Pope Francis' death sets into motion a 9-day mourning period, which includes several funeral rituals to honor his legacy. For more on that legacy, the CBC's Megan Williams joins us from just outside the Vatican. So, Megan, what has the reaction to the news been so far?
Well, immense sadness. I mean, this was a Pope who spoke to Catholics, of course, but who spoke far beyond the Catholic Church, as we've heard all these tributes from around the world pour in. I was speaking just now in the square with a gay man from California who said that when the Pope gave that initial message shortly after he was elected in 2013, who am I to judge? That it shifted his own experience within his Catholic parish in California. That's just one small example, but he was a Pope that really wasn't that interested in enforcing doctrine or spending a lot of energy on cultural wars, but reaching out and including as many people as he could. And even Holy Thursday, he wasn't able this year to wash the prisoners' feet, but he went and visited them. And every time he visited them each year, and this was the first Pope to wash the feet of female prisoners, Muslim prisoners, but he would say to them, you know, why is it that you're in prison and I'm not? That he could just as easily have been in their shoes. And he transmitted that message with pretty much everything he did.
Pope Francis, Megan, he apologized for the Catholic Church's role in residential schools in 2022 while he was on a visit to Canada. How significant is reconciliation to this Pope's legacy?
I think it's one of the highlights of his legacy. I think this is a Pope who understood the colonialist legacy. He was from South America. It was not only with the residential school situation. He also had a summit on the Amazon. He understood the damage of colonialism, colonial crimes, and he understood why it was so important to make that trip at a time when he wasn't feeling very well. He canceled other international trips, but he made that one, which I think is a reflection of just how acutely and deeply he understood the importance of reconciliation.
How will Pope Francis and his legacy be remembered by the Church?
I think he was a very savvy disruptor. He was a Pope who clearly had a vision, who wanted to transform the Church. I mean, he announced that vision right after his election. He wanted a poor church for the poor, meaning that he wanted a church that responded to the issues of the day for people who aren't necessarily included, a lot of the people who were overlooked. And I think he was successful in shifting the Church in that direction. We'll see what follows it, of course, but he was very savvy in how he did that. And I think we're left with a very different Catholic Church than we had 12 years ago.
Megan, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Megan Williams in Rome. Well, for many Canadians, the image of Pope Francis that will endure is that of him on Canadian soil in 2022.
You have traveled a long way to be with us on our land and to walk with us on the path of reconciliation.
That, of course, is when Pope Francis offered an apology to residential school survivors on behalf of the Catholic Church. This gesture was a result of the effort by many advocates and residential school survivors like Phil Fontaine, who traveled to the Vatican seeking an apology first in 2009, which was denied, and again in 2022. The former National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Phil Fontaine, joins us now to discuss the legacy Pope Francis leaves behind. Phil Fontaine, it's good to see you, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
What was your reaction today when you heard the news?
Well, it was quite early in the morning for me, and but I wasn't entirely surprised that Pope Francis was gone, and it gave me an opportunity to reflect on a special moment that was presented to us, survivors and families, that were invited to a private audience with His Holiness. And I was struck by how humble he was, compassionate, and listened intently and carefully to what 15 of us survivors that were invited into this private audience had to say, and then made a commitment to us that in the general audience he would offer a more fulsome statement that would then be taken to our homeland here in Canada, where he would extend the apology that you offered us in the general audience at the Vatican.
You know, you met with two popes seeking that apology, Phil Fontaine, Pope Benedict and later Pope Francis. Denied by one, but given by the other. I mean, what did it mean to have Pope Francis come here and make that apology more broadly that he promised you?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't discount or dismiss the what some have described as a failure to convince Benedict XVI to apologize to us, because what he did do was express his very serious regrets to what had the harms and injuries that had been inflicted on innocent children. That particular invitation to a private audience actually opened the door to this much larger, momentous occasion with Pope Francis. They're both, I mean, opposites. They're completely different. As I indicated, Francis was a humble and compassionate individual that understood the depth and breadth of the harms and injuries that had been inflicted on innocent children by people of the Catholic Church that ran these residential schools. And it was an incredible moment for us to that we were able to share with our families and our communities.
It was an important first step on the path to reconciliation, but it's a path the country still walks. I mean, a lot of people believed that even at the time it wasn't quite enough, but no one person, I guess, can satisfy an issue as complex and difficult as this one. I wonder, Phil Fontaine, what do you think Pope Francis' legacy will be for reconciliation in Canada?
Well, you're absolutely right. Words aren't enough, but the commitment to walk this path of reconciliation with us, that must be based on truth, was a very serious commitment that he had made to us. And he fulfilled that commitment when he traveled to Muscogees, and then to the Commonwealth Stadium, then to Lac Saint Anne, and then to Quebec, and then to the north. He was committed. It was pretty obvious to most that he was committed to the path of reconciliation, and he understood that true reconciliation could only be achieved by exposing the truth of our experiences. And as horrendous and as difficult as these truths may be or might be, not just to the people that live the experience, but in fact to Canadians, because this is very much a Canadian story. It isn't just a story about the survivors. And Pope Francis made it possible for others to accept the truth of these experiences that have been described very, very honestly with him in our private audience.
So Phil Fontaine, as a final point, I mean, significant progress under this Pope. What do you hope to see from the next Pope, and where do you hope to see the Catholic Church go from here in terms of the work that still needs to be done on this?
Well, my hope is that they will elect at this next conclave a Pope just as progressive, if not more progressive than Pope Francis, and that it will be very difficult, even if they don't succeed in that, it'll be very difficult for the Catholic Church and its various entities to veer from this path that had been set by Pope Francis, this clear path to true reconciliation and the healing that will result from hearing the truth, that will lead, that will bring us to a place where people can begin living their lives as whole people, not as fractured individuals and fractured communities, fractured relationships with the Catholic Church and our people.
Phil Fontaine, former National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, we always appreciate your time, sir. Thank you for being with us on this important day.
Thank you, sir.
We'll have more reaction and coverage of the Pope's death throughout the show, plus coverage of Day 30 of the federal election campaign. Up next, Eric Grenier with the latest numbers from the CBC Poll Tracker. Well, the federal election campaign has entered the home stretch. Millions have already voted, and in 1 week, we'll know who Canadians have chosen as their next government. Today, leaders look to sway undecided voters on day 30 of this campaign. The Liberals focus on health care, the Conservatives on housing, and the NDP on expanding pharmacare. There's lots to discuss with the Power Panel. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Cheryl Oates was Director of Communications for former Alberta New Democrat Premier Rachel Notley. And here with me in the studio, Jonathan Kalis, a former Quebec advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Happy Monday, gang, and happy day 30. Thanks for being here with a week to go.
One more week.
All right, we're going to get all of their thoughts, but first we're going to check in on the state of the race with just 1 week to go until Election Day. And that means it's time for the RIT.ca's Eric Grenier. He joins us now as he does every Monday. Eric, of course, runs the CBC's poll tracker. So, Eric, a lot of polling since the debates. Last week, the Liberals were holding about a 6-point lead over the Conservatives nationally. We've had the debates. Where do they all stand now?
We're seeing that there's a little bit of tightening in the polls, but that the Liberal lead is still holding pretty firm. So if we look at where the polls are right now in the poll tracker, which puts together all the polls that are being published throughout this campaign, the Liberals are still leading in our averages with 43.2% support. The Conservatives are in second with 38%. So again, we got a 5-point gap between the two parties, which has been a little bit smaller than where it was not too long ago, but still pretty good for the Liberals. And we got the NDP right now at 8.3%, the Bloc Québécois at 6%, and the Greens are at 2% support across the country.
Okay, you know, a few months ago, 43%, the Liberals would have been lucky to get 43 seats. You say it's a 5-point lead. The Liberals have a big advantage usually in vote efficiency. So those numbers, how do they translate into seat standings using your modeling?
Yeah, well, because we'll get into the regional numbers and it'll explain why the numbers are as big as they are. But for the Liberals right now, projecting that they would win 194 seats with a range of between 176 to 214. Need 172 for majority government, so they're over that threshold. Conservatives are at 122 seats right now in the projection. Bloc Québécois is at 21. The NDP is at 5 with a range of 0 to 10, and the Greens are at 1 with the range of 0 to 2 seats. So majority territory right now for the Liberals.
Okay, we're going to go through those battlegrounds, as Eric said. We got the handy map. This is the way it's going to start on election night. We're going to go back to 2023. This is the vote from the last time people voted, overlaid on the new map. So you're going to see some anomalies, like a Liberal in Saskatchewan. That's last election's vote on the new boundaries for this election because things have changed. But let's look at the battlegrounds. So Atlantic Canada, this has been mostly red, 32 seats, 24-8, Liberal to Conservative. The Liberals were way underwater there. Now they've rebounded. What's the current state of play in the East Coast?
Yeah, right now on the East Coast in Atlantic Canada, the Liberals do have a pretty big lead, and we can look at where the numbers are right now in the region. The Liberals have 53% support across Atlantic Canada. The Conservatives right now are at a little over 34%. The NDP at 8%, and the Greens are at 2%. So pretty big lead for the Liberals in Atlantic Canada, and we've really seen that hold throughout the beginning, throughout the whole campaign. Since the beginning, they've been ahead. Okay.
All right, so that looks like it's stable. We'll look at Quebec. This blue is the Bloc Québécois, by the way. The Conservative blue on this map is this much darker one here. The Liberals, their stronghold, of course, Eric, is the island of Montreal. The battle here is in the suburbs and the north and south shore. Post the debate, maybe some movement for Mr. Blanchette? What are we seeing in Quebec?
Yeah, it does seem like there might be a little bit of positive movement for the Bloc in Quebec. If we look at where those numbers are in the province, the Liberals still lead. They got 41%. We did see it earlier on in the campaign. They were higher than that, so they've come down a little bit from where they were at their high point. The Bloc Québécois is in second. The last time we chatted, I think the Bloc was in third place, but they're in second right now with 25%. Conservatives still holding pretty good at 23%, which is a lot more than they had in the last election, and the NDP very far back in 6%. So something to watch. We have seen a number of polls suggesting maybe the Bloc is coming up, and once they get a little bit higher than that, you could see a lot of seats in Quebec start to flip from Bloc or from Liberal over back to the Bloc.
Yeah, you get 5-6 percentage points, and suddenly double-digit seats start to move, right? Okay, Ontario. This is the ball game for this election, right? The key battleground down around the GTA. That's central and southern Ontario and southwestern Ontario. The Conservatives have to storm the suburbs around Toronto if they're going to form government. What does the numbers look like here in Ontario?
We're not really seeing any movement in Ontario, and that is probably the reason why the Liberals are so favored in the seat projection. If we look at where things are in Ontario, 49% support for the Liberals in the province. We've seen a number of polls out today showing double-digit leads for the Liberals in Ontario, 38% for the Conservatives, 8.5% for the NDP. And sometimes we're getting some GTA numbers. They're not very good for the Conservatives, at least not enough to have hopes of flipping a lot of seats. So if anything's going to change for the Conservatives, it has to happen in Ontario, but we haven't seen it happen yet.
Right, so the York region will be competitive, but the Bramptons, the Mississauga, Peel, that's where there's some challenges. All right, let's go to the prairies. So like Saskatchewan and Manitoba tend to get lumped together in a lot of the polling. This, as I say, is a vote from the 2021 election with the new boundaries here. There is no Liberal seat in Saskatchewan. But the numbers suggest there could be. Eric, walk us through Manitoba and Saskatchewan.
Yeah, there could be. So yeah, the pollsters combine the two provinces just because they're too small to each have their own sample in most of the national polling. The Conservatives have a lead in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba, 49%. The Liberals are at 35%, are actually doing quite well. They might be in a neck-and-neck race with the Conservatives in Manitoba. Conservatives doing better in Saskatchewan. The NDP is at 10.5%. But yeah, we've seen some polling suggesting that the Liberals could be competitive in Saskatoon and Regina. I mean, it's the kind of thing I'll have to see to believe, but with the kind of numbers we've seen, it is possible that the Liberals could pick up a handful of seats in Saskatchewan.
Right, and Carla Beck and the NDP did very well in the major cities in the provincial election there. Okay, let's have a look at Alberta. It is going to be a very blue map, you know, where we might see some red and some orange. We're going to go into the cities. Calgary, of course, is a place where the Liberals hold one seat, hope to gain some more, and then, of course, there's Edmonton, where all three parties are potentially in play there. Well, what's your sense of where things stand here in Alberta right now?
We could see some movement in Alberta because of what's happened in the polls. If we look at where things are, the Conservatives have a big lead in Alberta. No shock there. They're at 59% support in the province in the polls. The Liberals are at 29%, which would be better than what Justin Trudeau did in 2015 when they won 4 seats in the province. So that's why it could be possible that we could see a couple more seats go to the Liberals in Edmonton and Calgary. The NDP at 8.5%, they're just going to be trying to hope to hold the 2 seats that they won last time. One of them seems pretty safe, Edmonton-Strathcona. Edmonton-Griesbach could be a bit of a challenge.
Okay, look, there's 3 seats in the north. I don't think there's any data drilling down specifically on those. So British Columbia is the last thing we're going to talk about. A lot of this orange is in trouble, I think it's safe to say, Eric, and then we get into the lower mainland. We've got a little bit of green there on the island. A lot of 3-way splits potentially here, depending on which side of the Fraser River you're on. How does British Columbia look right now in the data that we have?
BC is probably the biggest puzzle when it comes to the polls. If we look at where things are right now, Liberals actually have a lead in British Columbia, and it's been holding pretty steady now for the last few weeks at 43%. The Conservatives have at 39.5% support in BC. The NDP is down to 13%. They had 29% last time. So that means they have less than half of the vote. The question is how much of it is going to be holding firm in the places where they have seats, how much is it going to collapse outside of those ridings? But with these kinds of numbers, Liberals could make a lot of gains in the Lower Mainland, on Vancouver Island. It's just a question of how many New Democrats are going to be able to survive.
Okay, I'm wiping it back to this because the only poll that matters is Election Day.
I've heard that.
As people like to say. But basically, the way all of these regional numbers break down, there needs to be significant movement, probably in Ontario and Quebec, for the Liberals to fall out of first place with a week left to go.
I think that Quebec and maybe British Columbia would be, if we're talking about the minority government, majority government, but for the Conservatives, they're going to have a shot to win. Those numbers I showed in Ontario, that's the end of the campaign for the Conservatives. They cannot win if they're down double digits in Ontario, and we haven't seen any movement. There has been that tightening we've seen in the polls, a little bit of it nationally, but it hasn't taken place in Ontario, and if it continues to hold firm for the Liberals, then they're going to cruise to a win, and probably a majority if they can hold those kinds of numbers.
Right, so not just tightening in Ontario, they got to move into first, the Conservatives.
They got to move big time.
Okay, all right, Eric, thank you, big time. That's Eric Grenier with the writ.ca. Okay, we're going to talk about all of this with the Power Panel. We're going to dig into those numbers. We've got Cheryl Oates, Lisa Raitt, Rob Rousseau, and Jonathan Kalis. So, Jono, with a week to go, a Liberal who was facing extinction a few months ago, how are you feeling right now? What's your sense of the state of this race?
Well, I mean, definitely much better than I was feeling, I don't know, 6 weeks ago or 6 months ago. But I think that there's a lot of work to do. 6 days left, 7 days left of the campaigning. It's get out the vote. It's staying on message. It's not making mistakes. This is a close race, and so not making a mistake, any mistake can change how this works out. I am most focused in terms of looking at polls, where the NDP numbers go in the rest of the country and where the Bloc numbers go in Quebec. So we've seen we've seen a bunch of polls today. I'm waiting for a Léger poll in Quebec to tell me what the Bloc is doing in Quebec because, you know, as Eric said, if the Bloc goes up 2-3 points,
moves mountains.
That could be 10, 12 ridings in Quebec that switch back from the way it's shading now to the Bloc. And whether it's majority or minority, or really whether, you know, the Conservatives are able to tighten the lead in Ontario, then those seats start to make a difference. I think The NDP again in Vancouver and on Vancouver Island. Right. That's where you're going to see them focusing, I would assume, in the last week of the campaign.
Lisa, what's your sense of the way Eric kind of laid it out and what seems like a pretty narrowing path to victory for Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives with a week to go? How do you see their chances to bust through here?
So, the weirdest thing about this, David, is the fact that the numbers, like 39% for Conservatives, is a great number, I know. Quite frankly. Yeah. And when I said before to you, I'm door knocking, so I was lucky enough to get some insight both in Cape Breton and here in my riding in Milton as to what's going on the ground. And in Toronto, too, I've been in there with Karen Stintz. And quite frankly, it doesn't feel terrible. So I don't know quite what to think about it. And it's not about denying what the pollsters are saying. I'm just saying that it's really strange for us to see such support at the doors. It's not the outright rejection of a Conservative coming to your door. There's an openness, there's a willingness to hear, they're interested, they like parts of it, they agree with us on the 10 years of the Liberal government. Whether or not we can convert that on election day to get it into a vote for us is going to be the question. And really, it's going to be in the hands of the voters. So I'm not disagreeing with anything that I'm seeing in the polls. I'm just saying it feels different at the doors, and perhaps maybe there's a chance. I'm always hopeful, and I'm also a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. So there you go.
Yeah, well, but on that, Lisa, I mean, 39% is where you guys were in 2011 when you won a majority government. So you can have both high levels of solid, motivated support, and the Liberals could still win because they just have a higher level of support. It's a very strange binary election turning out here.
Well, and it's because the NDP collapse is what it's coming down to. And that's the story of this election. It's the Progressives coalescing. But I saw something interesting, I thought. Correct me if I'm wrong, David. I may have misheard it. But I thought I heard something along the lines that Yves-François Blanchet announced on Tout le monde en parle that Mr. Carney was going to win. Yeah. And I thought that was an interesting thing for him to do, because he's saying to Quebecers, look, he's got it bagged. Don't worry about it. You should really vote for me to make sure we get a few more Bloc voices in the House. And I thought that was very, very cagey the way he did it.
Yeah, the Yves-François Blanchet decision desk is projecting a Liberal government.
Sing's done something similar.
Sing has done something similar. Cheryl, what do you make of these moves? Because it has increasingly become the two frontrunners competing for the Prime Minister's office, and then the Bloc and the NDP, campaigning to hold some sort of balance or presence in what they hope would be yet another minority parliament. How do you see it based on what Eric walked us through right now?
Yeah, and I think what we just talked about in terms of the Bloc's positioning to say, don't worry about the overall picture. Here's our strategic argument about why you should vote for us. That is where the NDP has moved throughout this campaign as well. I mean, we saw no one wants to kick off an election campaign and not say, I'm running to be your prime minister. So, of course, that's how the NDP started. But as the campaign has evolved, we have seen this subtle shift from the NDP in terms of its messaging, in terms of Jagmeet Singh's offer, to not say, elect me to take on Donald Trump for you, but to remind people why they voted for New Democrats in the first place. And they're doing that in a much more targeted way in these last few days. So you see, Jagmeet out in Victoria, which has been historically an NDP safe seat, but doesn't look quite as safe this election. He's turned up to hundreds of people out to support him, out to rally for him. And so I think that's what you'll continue to see the NDP do over the course of this last week, is really target those incumbent ridings to make sure that people turn out, use their incredible ground game, and outperform what the national trends are currently predicting.
Yeah. Rob, to be fair, Yves-François Blanchet did start this campaign saying he didn't want to be prime minister. but he is a rarity. He is a rarity on that one. What do you make of where things are?
I'm reminded of what Stephen Harper used to say 15 years ago, maybe further back, that about 2/3 of the country wakes up every day thinking, how are they going to support a progressive cause or a progressive party? And the Conservatives have about 1/3 of that vote apart from that. The story of this election is that 2/3 have decided to back the Liberal Party. Almost the entire 2/3 of that progressive set of voters have decided to back the Liberal Party. I'm struck by how stagnant the NDP number is. There's been a little bit of movement with the BQ numbers, a little bit of movement with the Liberal number, but the NDP number does not seem to move. So Mr. Blanchet's offer is an interesting one, reminding me of Kathleen Wynne in 2018 when she said, we're going down.
Yeah.
We're going down. We know we're going down. So we're just, we're going to try and do what we can to be a decent opposition.
She also promised to quit, though.
That's
Mr. Blanchet
right.
is not doing that.
No,
Yeah.
that's right. But it's not a dissimilar thing. We're not going to do as well as we hoped, is what Mr. Blanchet is saying. We have a victor, but help us out by keeping the victor honest. David Hurley has said that probably saved in Ontario 7 or 8 Liberal seats. I think if he could, Mr. Blanchet could save an additional 7 or 8 seats from what he has now, then that would be a respectable result. Although I would, again, ask a lot of questions. As somebody who's lived in the province of Quebec for some time, I would be asking pointed questions of Mr. Blanchet. How is it that he is about to lose, and lose decisively, if the polls are to be believed, to a near unilingual Anglophone who doesn't know Quebec all of that well and stumbled and bumbled through the campaign there? I think that's a legitimate question that he is going to have to answer. And I also think if the Liberals do go on and form a majority government, the other leaders are going to have to answer some very pointed questions as well. Should these results endure?
Well, the answer, Rob, is because it's the weirdest election ever. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, just the change and the shift, and Jono, like we have, as you know, Mark Carney, it is his resume, his experience, and his demeanor that transcends any language challenges and seems to be resonating. This is what you hear, you know, from all the Quebec journalists and pundits we have on the show. You know, Mr. Blanchet making this pitch, what is your sense as a Liberal, the effectiveness of what he did on Tullamarine last night in terms of making that as a closing argument here?
I think it was a smart approach. I think it's the right way to go. I just don't know if it's going to be effective. I'm just not convinced. And as we saw, there's been a little bit of movement in the polling, but it's still within the margin of error. So, you know, maybe we'll see it over the next few days. We also have a lot of voter turnout in the advanced polling where once you've banked that vote, you're not going to change your mind. I don't know that he has much choice. I think that is the best way to go. But I also expect, as this campaign goes on for 6 more days, that you'll see another sweep through Quebec, and especially in the Montreal area, that North Shore, South Shore, where I think the Liberals are looking for gains, and I think that there are opportunities there. And I think that's where you're going to have to see whether he can find one issue to poke at Carney. He has not found it yet, and that also means that the Liberals have to make sure not to have any mistakes.
Yeah, it's certainly, there's a lot of coin toss races on the north and south shore of Montreal there, and that could determine whether you get the 40 seats that makes you comfortable for a majority, or you're down in the 30s and you're white knuckling it into Manitoba. Okay, well, Liberal leader Mark Carney, he is swinging through multiple provinces today as the race enters its final stretch. Carney kicked off day 30 of the campaign in Charlottetown with a healthcare announcement. He then stopped in Truro, Nova Scotia to speak with voters there. And tonight, he is in New Brunswick, holding a rally in Fredericton.
We know that hospitals and clinics have been closing when the needs in the healthcare system are growing. We have to reverse this trend and increase access to team-based care.
Carney says he has a plan to build more hospitals and add more doctors to the healthcare system. The CBC's Ashley Burke is with the Liberals this week. Ashley.
David, Mark Carney is kicking off the final week of this race, visiting all of the maritime provinces in one day. It's where he's dominating in the polls and is hoping voters here will help him win a strong mandate. At an announcement in PEI, Carney reiterated his plan to free up space at medical schools to train more doctors, cover up to $20,000 for a cycle of in vitro fertilization treatment, and help improve access to abortions. He's trying to contrast himself with the Conservative leader by saying that he'll stand up for Canadians' rights, while Pierre Poilievre wants to override them. Poilievre has promised to become the first prime minister to use the notwithstanding clause to keep mass murderers behind bars until the day they die. That would mean overriding a Supreme Court decision that found it unconstitutional. Carney says if the Constitution is ignored, where will it end? He's expected to touch down in 4 provinces today as his campaign picks up the pace until Election Day. David?
Thank you, Ashley. That's the CBC's Ashley Burke with the Liberal campaign. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre spent the day talking about housing in the Greater Toronto area. Poilievre visited Scarborough this morning and repeated his plan to build 2.3 million homes over the next 5 years. He then headed over to Markham to tour a plastics manufacturing facility.
Mark Carney launched a platform that will add $130 billion more spending than Trudeau had already projected. In other words, as crazy and costly as Trudeau's budget plan already was, Mark Carney's is even worse.
While Poilievre takes aim at Carney's costed platform, he says his own costed platform will be released tomorrow. The CBC's Kate McKenna is following the Poilievre campaign. Kate.
David, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is the only major federal party leader who hasn't yet released a costed platform. Now that's set to change. He confirmed today a platform is coming tomorrow, but he's long faced questions and criticism about why it's taken so long. We know that the Conservatives have wanted this election for months. We're now in the final days of the campaign. Advance polls are over, and Liberals are now contending that the Conservatives have committed $140 billion in new measures and promises they've already made. Now we know that Pierre Poilievre has promised to save $1, to cut $1 of spending for every new measure proposed. So the Liberals are saying that he's going to have to cut $140 billion in the Canadian budget. Well, today Pierre Poilievre said that's not true.
Whenever Liberals present you with numbers, you should be afraid, and very afraid, because their numbers are always wrong.
He's set to release his campaign tomorrow while he's in the Greater Toronto area. This is a region that he's put a lot of time into already. He made a housing announcement in Scarborough this morning, and we can expect that it's going to continue to be a key battleground for the Conservatives during this campaign throughout this week, because they need to make inroads here if they have any shot at forming government. David?
All right, Kate, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Kate McKenna in Toronto. Well, on those platforms, on Saturday, the Liberal leader, Mark Carney, did lay out his party's platform. Carney called it a plan for the biggest crisis of our lifetimes. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre called it a spending bonanza.
I know that when you're in a crisis, you have to act with purpose and with force. Your government needs to step in.
Mark Carney's Liberals are even more costly than Justin Trudeau's Liberals.
Okay, the Power Panel is back to talk about all of this. Lisa, I'd like to start with you if I can. I mean, the headline from the Liberal platform is $130 billion in spending and tax cuts over 4 years. That's going to add $225 billion to the federal debt. Now, they don't have included in that any of the revenue and increased economic activity they say their measures will generate. So it's the headline that stands, right? So what do you make of what we saw from Mark Carney on Saturday?
Well, I think it's a good indicator of why they're doing well in the Maritimes, to be honest, David. If you take a look at the demographics of the Maritime provinces, they run about 22 to 25% over 65 years of age. And those who are over 65 years of age really don't have a problem with the spending that is coming from a Liberal government. In fact, they embrace it. They enjoy it. They are not concerned about what's happening in terms of how the spending is going to impact the future. And I say that because I find it very frustrating, because I look at the younger demographic who are really concerned about it, because they're the ones that are going to be stuck with the bill. So all of that to say, I can see why the message of spending and spending more is going to resonate in Atlantic Canada, given their demographics, and why it would be a little harder for Pierre to punch through talking about the problems associated with spending that much money, because he's talking to a population that votes that isn't really interested in being concerned about that spend.
Cheryl, I wonder when I look at this platform, and I don't know what we'll see from the Conservatives tomorrow, but they all seem to be using the PBO baseline for the deficit. And I'm not even sure how accurate that is with everything Donald Trump has done and will do. You know, like, this is not anyone's being dishonest. It's just everything's changed. Does a big deficit matter to Canadians in this election right now? I mean, it did when I was growing up in the 90s, but I'm not so sure in 2025. What's your take?
I think it still matters, but I think it's not about necessarily like what you're spending alone. It's about what you're getting for that money. And when I look at these platforms rolled out over the weekend, and I look at the Liberal platform that we're talking about, I'm thinking about it from, my time inside a campaign and how difficult platform development is, because there's so many things to consider and there's so many strategies. And in this case, I think the Liberals have put forward a platform that's really hard for the Conservatives to compete with. I mean, yes, there's a lot of spending in this, but the biggest pieces of that spending are tax cuts and the canceling of the capital gains tax, which are both things that the Conservatives want to do as well. And then they've basically set up the rest of their spending to say we're going to spend on defense, we're going to spend on national infrastructure projects, and we're going to spend on housing, all things the Conservatives support as well. So I mean, these are always strategic documents, but in this case, those are things that are really, really tough for Pierre Poilievre to say those are bad ideas and bad things to spend on when he himself wants to spend on the same things.
Yeah, Rob, that's what I wonder about. When I say deficits don't matter, I mean, obviously they matter. I just mean in terms of people making up their minds to vote. And in an election, in a political cycle where it's like, we got to do something about the military, we got to do something about housing, we got to get ports going, we got to invest in transmission, we got to do infrastructure. There's no way forward without some added debt if you're going to tackle those things, it seems.
I don't know. I look at when it was released. It was released on a Saturday during Easter weekend. I see that as almost the equivalent of they tossed it out the door of the bus, the tour bus, as it was going by the meeting with the reporters. The headlines that came out of it were, I thought, not good headlines for the Liberals. Spending more than Justin Trudeau. What is the brand of Mark Carney? The brand is sober, if not sepulchral, and grim realization. We used to talk about thematics when we were here, when I was here at CBC, and talk about coming up with a theme of the day, and we would string together the pearls on that theme, on that narrative theme, the necklace. The narrative theme has to be, these are very tough times. We're going to have to sacrifice, some have said. And I've heard Mark Carney say similar words to that. I didn't see a lot of sacrifice here. I didn't see it underlying, I didn't see a strong connection made between this document and the menace, the Trump menace. I know.
Really?
I heard it a bit today, but in terms of the covers that I saw and the way people treated it, no, it was about more spending. I think that Mark Carney is a serious guy, and he is a banker to the core. He wasn't going to fluff these numbers. Now, that doesn't mean that they're written in tablets of stone with a hammer and chisel. We all know that they're going to change. And there's a certain amount of pixie dust involved with all of this, and a certain amount of guesswork, because we don't know what the impact yet and how widespread the impact yet is going to be of the tariffs. But doing things like abandoning fiscal anchors, I think, is the kind of thing that breeds cynicism and saps the credibility of all governments. And they've abandoned some fiscal anchors that were there just a few months ago. And I'm not sure that that's a great thing for Mr. Carney, for the Liberals, and for politics in general.
So, Jono, to continue with the thematic themes, when I looked at it, what I noticed was how the spending, the proportions of it have shifted. That Justin Trudeau was very much expand the role and scope and scale of what core government does and run up deficits that way. The ratio is almost flipped. Like, this is money that's going to go into capital purchase and economic activity. And I think this is what they're trying to get at with their spend less and invest more, which is almost too clever to be fully understood. So it runs up debt, but it's not with a government program. It's something that builds things. Is that too complicated as a closing argument for Mr. Carney, do you think?
I think that's too complicated for an argument. I think the argument is pretty simple. Donald Trump, the economy, these are measures that we absolutely need to take. That is where the big chunk of the expenses are. The tax cuts are because people are going to be going through really tough times, and it's trying to make cost of living a little bit more affordable, less taxes. Housing, defense, these are the big ticket issues. That's what people need. Infrastructure spending, when you're in a recession, Stephen Harper did it. Most economies do that when you're facing a recession or you're in one. So this is reacting to the Trump tariffs and the economic tumult that we're going through and will be going through. That is the message. They need to repeat it over and over again. They can't be distracted, in my opinion, by other issues. That has to be the only issue for the last 7 days. Yes, Pierre Poilievre hasn't come out with his, it'll be tomorrow, I guess. Okay, he's been a leader for 2 years and been begging for an election and still doesn't have a platform now 5 days before it'll be. He has $140 million in either new expenses
billion.
Billion. 140 billion, which is more than the Liberals.
Yeah. Elections are all about billions,
yes, in new either spending or in tax cuts. Well, he said dollar for dollar is how it's going to work. What is he cutting? That's a lot of cutting. I know he announced $10 billion in consultants that he's going to cut. That's not going to balance the book. So where is he cutting? Efficiencies, all of these magical. He even talked about, I think it was Saturday, $70 billion in revenue he's going to magically create from new natural resource revenue that's going to come into the country. That's certainly not going to happen tomorrow or in a year. I know he's going to. If he wins, he's going to have, authorizations for projects quickly, but doesn't mean that the revenue is going to be coming in quickly. So his magical math, I'm not sure about either.
Well, look, some of his tax cuts will have a revenue-generated component to it, and they've shown us the homework on this. Like the stuff to spur housing growth will lead to extra profits and income in the construction sector, and some of that will spur things back. But Lisa, kind of one of the things I noticed as a through line from Carney yesterday was that when the private sector is uncertain, government must act, and that seems to be his justification for the spending, because whoever wins this, the uncertainty all of this causes, the private sector is going to be reluctant to make big decisions and make big spends. So when Mr. Poilievre focuses aggressively on the deficit, I mean, what does he need to deliver tomorrow to show an economic growth and fiscal balancing plan? And can you do it with all of that uncertainty and all the promises?
Well, the reason why there's business uncertainty in this country is because of the last 10 years of a Liberal government creating the uncertainty in the economy and not investing when they said they were going to invest, and not encouraging business investment and productivity. And all of a sudden they're going to do it now. And I don't buy it for a second. I don't think they have the capabilities or the competence to be able to implement. No matter how great Mark Carney is, he's only one man and he can't do it all himself. And they haven't been able to get out of their own way in the last 10 years. So how do they expect they're going to get it done this time? That's what I want to know from Canadians. I don't know how they think that this can possibly be done. As for what is going to happen with respect to Pierre and his, well, tomorrow we will see exactly how he plans to move forward. They've been thinking about this for a long time, obviously for 2 years. It's about growing that top line. It's about bringing in more revenues. It's about listening to what big companies have said in terms of what they do need in order to have investment in the country, to give them the signal that they need in order to create investment. And I don't know whether or not Mark Carney has listened to the other companies, because quite frankly, he is still extremely silent on, I think, the crucial piece of national security and the national economy, and that is whether or not we're going to run pipelines to tidewater in this country to diversify our energy market. And he's silent on it, absolutely silent. Well, so unless we understand from him what he's going to do there, I don't think we can actually take for any kind of seriousness with respect to his numbers.
What's the missing piece of the position on pipelines? I mean, he said he will use the extraordinary powers of the federal government to accelerate review processes. And, the one project, one timeline, he stopped short of being willing to force it over the objections of a province and, I believe, First Nations. What's the missing part of that?
The missing part of it is the Impact Assessment Act in and of itself is not just what it says about one project, one assessment. It has a whole bunch of other things in there that are annoyances. We have a part of the Competition Act that goes to greenwashing that he doesn't talk about. We have a part of an emissions protocol in Alberta that he doesn't talk about either, that he doesn't want to step away from there. I mean, there are lots of little pieces that have ground this country into a standstill when it comes to building infrastructure associated with the energy industry in the last 10 years. And they know it. And he's silent on it.
Yeah, they have suggested some sort of flexibility or willingness to be flexible on the emissions cap, but they still believe in the emissions cap as an instrument, and that is not something the oil patch and the gas producers are in favor of. I think it's very safe to say.
Or Canadians, David. It's not just industry. Canadians have said time and time again they are supportive of our fossil fuel industry, of our energy industry, and they want to see pipelines built. So I hope when he's thinking about what kind of a mandate he may be getting from the Canadian public on the 28th, that he does not interpret this as a free-for-all on the way that he wants to approach it from an environmental point of view.
Okay, Cheryl, your thoughts on what Pierre Poilievre needs to deliver tomorrow, because he's put a lot of he's going to keep the programs that exist. He's going to cut some taxes. He's going to do his own stuff, and yet he's promised this dollar-for-dollar balanced budget position. I mean, can you deliver all of those things and spend on things like defense and housing and infrastructure at the scale the country apparently needs?
Listen, I don't think you'll be shocked to hear my hopes are not high. Like throughout this campaign and throughout his time as leader, Pierre Poilievre has been a guy that comes up with really good rhymes and really great talking points. And to his credit, they have worked with a whole crowd of people. And at this point in the campaign, those are the people they've now turned their efforts to getting those people to the polls. And I don't believe that the people who have supported him for the last 2 years and the people who are turning out for his rallies are just waiting to see how he balances his budget to decide how they're going to vote. So truthfully, I think, probably all of the parties, the Conservatives releasing their platform is probably inconsequential. But sort of an aside, I don't think this is what someone who's trying to be a front runner or trying to be prime minister, I don't think this is what their campaign looks like. Coming out days after all of the other platforms released, spending today answering questions with, snarky comebacks to say, like, when you hear Liberal numbers, you should be very scared. Like, that's not the positioning of someone who wants to be prime minister. The positioning would be to come out with your platform first, to say, we've been thinking about this for 2 years now. We have thoughtful plans and we know you've been worried about how we would implement them. Well, don't worry. We've thought long and hard about this and here's the document. So truthfully, I don't think this is going to move anybody and I don't think it's going to be consequential.
Rob, what are you looking for tomorrow? Lisa made the point that, Mark Carney's only one man, and let's face it, so much of the Liberals' success to this point in the campaign hinges on his appeal. But we also know who his finance minister is and will probably continue to be. I don't know who Mr. Poilievre's finance minister would be should they win the election on this. So what does he need to put on the table tomorrow in terms of a plan and its credibility and who would help implement it?
Just a realistic plan to deal with the restructuring, the rewiring, the replumbing of the Canadian economy over the next 4 or 5 years. Nothing more than that.
Nothing more than that. Yeah, it sounds very simple, Can we find a blade for my hair to grow back as well?
And so when I think Jonathan is right. When he talks about efficiencies, because the Liberal plan has, I can't remember how many billions.
$28
$29 billion.
Yeah, what's a billion between friends at this
stage? That's right.
Yeah.
It's like
I'm fact checking you.
Just a quick wave of the pixie dust, and they find efficiencies. With the Conservatives, it's going to be lobbyists. They're going to cut back on lobbyists. People
consultants, not lobbyists. Consultants.
That's right.
Consultants.
That's right.
Kind of the same, but yeah, I hear you.
Okay, yeah. But they're all part of the community that has grown outside of government, even as government has grown, even as we get more and more people working for government. People like to remind me that I've been around here a long time, and I have since the Earth's crust was cooling, essentially. I have never seen more lobbyists, more consultants. I have never heard of anybody who is talking, any political leader who is not talking to lobbyists and consultants. And that includes Mr. Poilievre. We all know people around town.
His war room's full of them. His campaign is run.
That's right.
I mean, it's just the way politics is right
now. That's right. You get your advice where you can. So I'm mark me down as skeptical when it comes to lobbyists and consultants being cut in a drastic way.
Okay. Well, look, we'll see the numbers. We'll see how it's released. We'll see if we get a technical briefing, an interview, an explanation, but we'll see. But as we approach Election Day, the Conservatives are also running 2 new ads, neither of which feature Pierre Poilievre.
Do you really think that a 4th Liberal term is going to change anything?
I've been thinking the same thing.
Are we really going to give these clowns a 4th term? I'm voting Conservative.
The 2 men running to lead us both once worked for me, and my choice unequivocally is Pierre Poilievre.
Okay, Cheryl, let's start with you. What do you make of that? A couple old guys playing golf, older guys, not old guys. I'm getting in that age myself. And Prime Minister Stephen Harper former Prime Minister, making an appeal for Pierre Poilievre. What do you make of those ads?
I only look to old rich white men to tell me what I need in life. So I completely see why these ads are resonating with people. I don't get it. I have never understood the Conservatives' ad strategy. This has not been the only cringeworthy ad that they've put out through this campaign. I understand Stephen Harper. There's a lot of people, within the Conservative circle who have a lot of respect for Stephen Harper, and that hearing from him can be a motivator. But the idea that, choosing Pierre Poilievre over Mark Carney is surprising to anyone for Stephen Harper. It shouldn't be. As I watch these ads, I'm so shocked because the Conservatives' digital advertising game is incredible. Like, their reach is incredible. Their ability to motivate people is incredible, but it's not in the content of their ads. It's in the communities they've created. They've created these huge online communities, hundreds of thousands, millions of eyeballs on everything that they do. And that's where the value is. It is clearly not in the content of their advertising, because this is shocking in the final stretch of a campaign.
Well, Lisa, one of those communities is obviously male boomers who, oddly enough, are not with the Conservatives at this stage of the election. And it seems to be a direct appeal to a cohort that they had in the past and think they can get this time, but that they don't have right now.
Yeah, who aren't, by the way, on any kind of digital platform whatsoever. They can barely operate the garage door opener, I think, sometimes. And
my dad can install a garage door. Come on.
Oh, very good. I'm sorry. Some people are handy. This is true. But the reality is that playing these ads during sports events is going to get the eyeballs of the people, and just reminding them what this is about from a Conservative point of view, which is you've given 10 years to the Liberal Party already. Are you going to give them another 4? And how do you really feel about this? Do you really want to do it that way? I actually think the ad's quite effective. I think it's eye-catching. I think if you see yourself in an ad, you're going to take a stop and you're going to look at it. I mean, is it going to attract my attention? No, because that's not me. But if you're going for the eyeballs of the over 55 male boomer, you're going to get their attention, especially if they're holding a golf club in their hands after the Masters.
Right. And, you know, Rob, I don't know if that was your golf course or not, but are we going to give these clowns another chance? Resonates differently with the Maple Leafs audience, I think. But, you know, what are your thoughts?
Hey. Easy.
I think when a party goes on offense, it always tells you about their defense. This tells us a great deal about their defense. This ad, our colleague Steve Marr suggests that this ad, there was a cattle call for old guys between 65 and 75. At a golf course on Monday last week.
To do it that day, I think, right?
To do it very, very quickly. Oh, cool. So this ad was cut very quickly. They know that they needed to do something and do it in a hurry. And so that tells you about their defense. Your suggestion is a very good one, too, because they don't talk about Pierre Poilievre in that ad. Yep. That tells you about their vulnerability as well. I wonder where the Liberal ads are. I know there's supposed to be a Liberal ad out there. I don't know that I've seen it. I saw that ad. Yes, I watch a lot of sports on the weekend. I saw that ad everywhere.
Yeah.
So that ad buy was huge. Now, whether or not it's effective, I can tell you that I've seen Conservatives swing golf clubs. I've seen Lisa Raitt swing a golf club. She should be ashamed that any Conservative would swing a golf club that way. This was shot.
That's a sleeper issue of this campaign. Right? Poor golf for
this was shot. I think just not in Canada, very close. Well, it might have been Canada, where I too have wielded weapons of grass destruction at a practice range, a public grass, just 2 or 3 days ago. It looks like it's very, very fresh. So there's some urgency there, which I think tells us a lot about what they need to shore up.
Jana, what do you make of it at this stage? Because I know the Liberals are apparently going to spend $8 million on ads this week. You know, we'll see in all platforms. But we saw the first Carney's, like, I was there in a crisis, the one I saw, but we've kind of been seeing a version of that from the beginning. I don't know what the closing argument will be. But what do you make of the decision, like so much of the marketing of the Conservatives to this point has been Pierre Poilievre front and center, and he's not in these two?
I think to Rob's point, I think that's where they're feeling a weakness. The polls have stagnated in the sense that they're really, really good for the Conservatives. They're 36, 37, 38. They're really very good. They need to grow a little bit more. And I think that Pierre Poilievre is not going to get them there by being front and center, and that they're focused on how to resonate with, yes, that over 65 cohort of men. I don't think that they're ineffective. I just think that maybe they're a little late, because I think that most voters have made up their mind. Maybe they should have gone to this earlier in the campaign. And I also wonder if it may have a secondary effect of plastering Stephen Harper. Yes, it will resonate, maybe even with centrist voters. But will it turn off NDP voters who then say, I'm going to go back to the Liberals because I got to make sure that this guy and the Stephen Harper, protege doesn't get in? That's also a danger, because really, this isn't about getting Liberal votes. It's about, making sure the NDP goes up. And that's got to be the name of the game. I don't know how you do that. It's sort of, the secondary effect of how you advertise. But for the Conservatives to win, they need the NDP to go up.
Yeah, I think the $3 million they spent destroying Jagmeet Singh in the fall could be the biggest buyer.
I don't think they're going to advertise on his behalf now.
But Lisa, your thoughts on the Poilievre out of the ads, and whatever you wanted to jump in on there.
I just wanted to add, so hypothetically speaking, one could say that when you knock on a door and a gentleman over the age of 55 opens it, you may hear him say, I like the Conservative policies, but I don't like the leader. You may hear that. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but you may absolutely hear that. And maybe that information is coming back to the central campaign, and maybe that's something they feel that they have to shore up on. And I think that putting these ads out at this point in time is trying to get into that last minute voter at the ballot box, that final decision of where do I mark that X, that little niggling doubt in the back as to putting, I may not like the guy that's running Conservatives, but man, do I want another 4 years of these Liberals after the last 10? And I think it's effective. Jonathan may be right, it may be too late, but I think they're hearing feedback from the doors hypothetically.
Okay, so hypothetically, you could have heard this in Cape Breton, for example, or in the Milton area while knocking on
downtown Toronto or Milton.
Hypothetically, Conservative members of Parliament could be texting a CBC host and telling them very much that same thing. Cheryl, on the other point about whether Stephen Harper, while maybe able to sway some of the hypothetical people Lisa's hypothetically hearing about, could he scare progressive New Democrats, as Jono suggested, who remember those years not quite as fondly, maybe, as people who can golf and pay for their kids' down payments do?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I think New Democrat, you haven't seen that vote move a lot. New Democrats in this election are just mostly motivated by the idea that they don't want Pierre Poilievre in government. And I've said this before, I don't think that means that New Democrats are, for this foreseeable future, moving towards Liberals just because they vote Liberal in this election. This is a anyone but Conservative vote. This is hold off the Conservative votes. This is I don't want Pierre Poilievre to be my Prime Minister vote. And all of those staunch New Democrats who are, letting the Liberals borrow their vote in this election, if that's what they're choosing, they will all go back to the NDP. And no matter how the NDP finishes in the election, those people will be there to rebuild the party no matter what, because we're stubborn.
Okay, well, you may need that stubbornness, because we're going to switch to the NDP now. It's no surprise to see NDP leader Jagmeet Singh campaigning in British Columbia, because that's where more than half of his MPs were from in this last parliament. Singh was in Nanaimo this morning talking about his plan to protect health care before heading to Comox to meet with local candidates and volunteers. And then it was wheels up to Vancouver, where Singh will hold a campaign event tonight.
If you're out there and you're tuning in right now and you're wondering, what do I do in this election? I'm worried about Pierre Poilievre and those cuts. I'm worried about Mark Carney and the cuts that he's proposing. What do I do? Well, I'll tell you this. Re-elect your New Democrat MP. Vote for a New Democrat, and we're going to fight for you.
Singh continues to pitch his party as a viable alternative to the Liberals and the Conservatives. The CBC's Marina von Stackelberg is traveling with the NDP leader. Marina.
Hey, David, we're on Vancouver Island, where the NDP has gone hard, hitting many ridings here over the weekend. This part of the country is normally New Democrat territory, so it's notable that they spent this much time campaigning in what are usually considered safe seats for them this close to Election Day. I asked some of the NDP candidates here if they're worried about losing this election like the polls suggest could happen. Many of them talk about the record number of requests for lawn signs they're getting as a sign that support is here. For a campaign that had a sleepy start, there seems to be a renewed sense of mobilization here in BC with more frequent and bigger events. We've seen staff that were working out of the NDP's headquarters in Ottawa head out to help with local campaigns. Singh has increasingly changed his messaging too. He's now calling on voters to keep their support with the NDP to prevent electing Conservatives on Vancouver Island and stop a Liberal majority in other parts of the country. Now we head back to Burnaby for what will be the party's first rally in the campaign. It's likely no accident. It's happening in Singh's own riding, which polling suggests he is at risk of losing. David?
Thank you, Marina. This is CBC's Marina von Stackelberg in Comox, British Columbia. Well, the Bloc Québécois leader, Yves-François Blanchet, is blitzing the province in this final week of the campaign. Blanchet made 4 different stops today, including Quebec City, where he spoke to reporters this morning.
Quebecers will decide how many of us will go in Ottawa and fight for Quebec and Quebec only.
Blanchette later stopped to buy a new Montreal Canadiens jersey ahead of their first playoff game of the season tonight. The CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian is with the Bloc Québécois this week. Rafi.
David, I'm near Quebec City covering the Bloc Québécois. With a week left in this campaign, it's not the only familiar territory leader Yves-François Blanchet visited. He focused on immigration today, saying that the federal government should not be establishing targets for provinces without consulting them, that Quebec should be continually consulted for goals in this province, and that it should be handed full controls over immigration. All this comes as Blanchet is now saying he believes that Liberals and Mark Carney will win on April 28th. He made those comments on the popular Radio-Canada talk show Tout le monde en parle on Sunday night, where he also said that he thinks his party can still be efficient with 25 MPs. That would be a loss of 8 seats for the Bloc. Today, though, he pushed back on that concession, saying the Bloc will be very happy come next Monday. David?
Okay, Rafi, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian. So, Cheryl, let's talk about what Marina set up for us there, the state of play for the NDP, because when we use this map here behind me and I get up on election night and do all that, we're doing path to victory for the Liberals and the Conservatives. It's like path to official party status at this point for the NDP. I mean, what's your sense of where they are in terms of getting over that magical number of 12 MPs next week?
Yeah, I mean, we all know the opening chessboard for the NDP has been a tough one throughout this election. There was no path to majority government in this campaign for the NDP, and so they've taken their $30 million worth of spending and been very strategic about it. They have looked to ridings where they have strong incumbents, and they've gone with a very strategic message, which has resonated with me. Even as I think about my vote and my support, and I talk to people around me, and they say, "What is the most important thing to you?" The most important thing to me is that we protect public services, that we protect healthcare, that we continue to expand pharmacare and dental care. Yes, I know the Liberals are a left of center party, but I only believe that those things will happen if there are NDP MPs in Parliament standing there holding their feet to the fire and reminding them that they have to do these things. That has been the case throughout this term, and I believe it will be the case going forward. And that message doesn't just resonate with me, it resonates in people in incumbent ridings across Canada who those values are really strong for them, and that's why they elected New Democrats in 2021. And so you hear that very clear message from Jagmeet Singh and the NDP in the places where they feel they are most likely to hold throughout this last week.
Rob, it seems to me for the NDP to have the success they want at this point, that message of that they are the conscience and the defender of these things really needs to punch through, or a Mark Carney victory needs to feel inevitable, because that would shake people up. And how do you see that going over the next 6 days?
Your last point, I think, is the most important point. We've now had several weeks of polls that suggest the Liberals are going to win a mandate. And in some cases, a comfortable majority. Anecdotally, a lot of New Democrats that I've spoken to, people who voted New Democrat in the past, who were going to vote for the Liberals this time, are now feeling a little less wary of voting for Jagmeet Singh. I watched his debate performance, both French and English, and I was struck by it. I know that he came in for a lot of flack online, in particular because some people found him annoying, offensive.
He interrupted a lot. Yeah. As I interrupt you to make that point.
No. And I actually thought what he was doing was he was compelled, he was obliged, if not clever, to remind people that he was there, that he is part of the firmament, that he's part of that the New Democrats, particularly in a time of looming economic peril, when people are going to be thrown out of jobs, have had traditionally a role to play in Canada. And I thought he put himself a little bit back in the game that way. It was the only play he had. And so I actually thought that was a smart play.
Jonathan, how do you see it? I mean, there are some MPs in the NDP caucus, no matter what we get in the aggregators and the seat projections, You know, Alexander Boularice, Lindsay Matheson, Leah Gazan, Heather McPherson, Don Davies. That's not an exhaustive list, but yeah. Well, I think Windsor is different this time. Windsor is challenging because of just southwestern Ontario with the trade exposure is a problem for the NDP. But there's a half dozen at least who are probably safe. What's your sense of what their status is?
I mean, I think Rob's point is right. I found him obnoxious during the debates, and I'm not his target audience. I'm never going to vote for him. He's trying to get people in those ridings in another 6, 8, 10, where the candidates are well known, they are appreciated, and yeah, this is about saving the furniture. So you focus on where you have a chance to do that, and that's why he's out in BC. That's why he's out in his own riding, and I think that he's actually more exposed than some of the other candidates you mentioned. But that's where they have a chance to be that voice, and even if there's a majority government, they're going to make noise. They're going to be there. They're going to ask their questions. They're going to make sure that they hold Liberals' feet to the fire. I just, at some point, I think there's also a bit of a fatigue with Jagmeet Singh. Third election just hasn't stirred it up. People are just not connecting with him. If they did the first few because they think he's a good guy and they kind of like him, now this is too serious to have this discussion. And he goes out and he's making these, it made me laugh, his attack on Mark Carney, because all the Carney's going to do is make cut. And the Conservatives are attacking Carney for spending too much. So I don't even know if that's going to resonate, this cut Carney guy. I'm not sure that people are buying that when everybody's criticizing him for spending too much. So even his messaging is not clear to me how to get it to the finish line. What is his core message at the end of the election?
It's Schrodinger's Carney, right? To progressives, he's a cutter. To conservatives, he's a spender. And I guess that makes you a liberal. I don't know how it works. Lisa, what are your thoughts on the map for the New Democrats right now? Because Atlantic Canada is going to be tough with the huge numbers out there for the Liberals. Ontario is going to be competitive to hold. It's kind of a Western Canada play at this point.
I think that's exactly it, David. I mean, if I take a look around here in southwestern Ontario, it's negligence. In fact, with respect to the NDP, they're just not around. Not a single sign. No one on the ground. No door knocking happening. No one vetting at the polls. It's actually quite shocking because usually there is a bit of a ground game here, but they all seem to have disappeared, and I don't know where they've gone. And it's really strange because I have to remind everybody that here in Ontario, they are the opposition. They are the loyal opposition in Ontario's legislature. So it's not like there isn't infrastructure out there in certain ridings. It's just not being utilized.
They're the opposition in Nova Scotia, in Ontario, the government in Manitoba, the opposition in Saskatchewan, the opposition in Alberta, and the government in British Columbia, right? So, Cheryl, that shows you that there is a brand recognition and brand support in a lot of places. Like finishing second in provincial elections is not nothing, right? So if you have to plot this, but if you have to plot this map to 12 plus seats, right? Because they're about 24, 25 right now. There's going to be some retrenchment, it seems. I mean, how do you see it playing out? What's your sense?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say too on the debate, because Jonna raised this point that Jagmeet was annoying in the debate. That's what I'm hoping for. Not that I have television that I really enjoy watching. I agree. When you watch a debate and someone's just needling, that's really annoying. But when you think of that person standing up in Parliament to the people who have power, saying what about healthcare? What about healthcare? What about healthcare? What about pharmacare? That is my champion. I want that person to do that. And when you are in the position Jagmeet was in that debate in this election, you've got to make yourself noticed and memorable somehow. And I think that was a really well executed strategy on that. Across Canada, David, I think the NDP will have to pull out exactly what it does in campaigns across this country, which is out ground gaming the current projections. And, we'll see that in the Lower Mainland. We'll see that in Alberta. We might see that in Southwestern Ontario or Montreal. But what we see in the current aggregator right now, likely the NDP will outperform those current polling numbers because the ground ground game is so effective and so efficient. And also the NDP, although, it's not a beneficial starting point, has the benefit of being in a position where it can be super, super, super targeted in this last week. So I think it will do better than the current aggregators are predicting.
Yeah. Rob, what's your sense of it? I agree with Cheryl. I don't see this 0 to 5 seat things. I think like 5, 6, 7, 8 at minimum, and then probably a pretty good shot at official party status, right?
Yeah, I think that they're being wise. I think Lisa was saying that she hasn't seen them. I think because they're smart enough to know that in the areas where Lisa is, they're not in play.
Yeah. Hamilton Mountain, though, Hamilton Center.
And around Winnipeg and around Manitoba, where they have
Winnipeg Center,
where they have a premier who's still quite popular, who still has a pretty effective machine. I expect them to be competitive in the province of Manitoba. So you've got to target where you can and abandon everything else. I'm in a riding of Ottawa Centre. I think some of us are as well, where the NDP used to be, they sent MPs. Paul Dewar was sent to Parliament many, many times. I've seen the candidate.
Joel Harden, right, versus Yasser Naqvi.
He's essentially disappeared, right? I don't see a lot of presence of the candidate or the machine. Yeah. So I'm seeing that in my own riding, and I suspect that's what Lisa's seeing in parts of southwestern Ontario as well.
So, John,
but we're highly unionized too. Sorry, I was going to say that it's also a highly unionized riding here, right? So that's the other fascinating part of this campaign is the fact that a lot of these union votes are going blue this time, that they're not necessarily going orange. So that's another part of the puzzle that's been taken away from the NDP.
Private sector union or public sector union, or a blend where you are, Lisa? Private sector.
Private sector.
Right, so that blue collar sort of blue-orange switcher, that sort of challenge. And John, this is kind of a final point. This is one of the challenges that Jagmeet Singh has. Like, people were questioning, why is he attacking Pierre Poilievre so much in the debate? He should be attacking Mark Carney. Well, he's kind of got red-orange fights. He's got blue-orange fights. And, the Democrats do want to see their guy attacking a move to the center economic liberal, right? In a way to sort of like lay out that demarcation between them, so you can feel you want to vote for the true progressive, as the NDP would say.
Well, look where he is today on Vancouver Island, where if he's losing 10 points, 12 points to a Liberal candidate, the Liberal candidate's not going to win, but the Conservative candidate's going to win.
Right.
So who's his argument with? And it is a challenge trying to figure out. I mean, yes, Mark Carney had the bigger challenge during debates because he was getting it from all sides, but Jagmeet Singh also has that challenge. And so, listen, they finished in Ontario where they knew they weren't going to win, and they kept official opposition. They were able to really hunker down and get those key ridings. That's what they're trying to do here. I don't know if they're going to be as successful because they're not fighting with the Liberals, they're fighting with the Conservatives in Ontario. We'll see. But that's the only strategy they have left. That must be what they're going to do in the last few days.
Yeah, Cheryl, just to give you the last word, but like the NDP political math is so complicated compared to everybody else's, right? Like, Boularice is surrounded by everyone on the island of Montreal. And then you get into southwestern Ontario where it's like red, orange, and blue orange fights in auto and industrial ridings. And then your urban progressive fights in the downtown cores of the major cities. And then there's Vancouver Island, which is Narnia compared to a lot of parts of Canada in terms of its political makeup. So how does Jagmeet Singh calibrate his message over the final 6-7 days here?
Well, I think one of the great things is that the message is probably the message that voters in southwestern Ontario are looking for from the NDP is the same as those on Vancouver Island. They're all worried about who's going to hold the government to account and who's going to make sure that the Liberals don't move too far to center or too far right of center in the grand scheme of things. And so, that message that has moved from I'm running to be your prime minister, I'm running to protect the things that matter to you through crisis, to say we really need a lot of New Democrats in government if we want to hold the people who are in power, their feet to the fire. If we want to push to make sure we continue to achieve the things that we've achieved over the last term, we need not just a couple people, we need at least 12 people. So I think that's the message specifically targeted to those who have voted NDP in the past and were considering or even thinking about voting Liberal this time is remember what you're giving up if you vote Liberal in this election.
Okay, I think we covered it all. Gang, I think we covered every possible outcome and possibility in this election. I want to thank you all for being here. Lisa Raitt, Cheryl Oates, Jonathan Kalis, and Rob Rousseau. We're 1 week to go. All right, after the break, we're going to turn back to our coverage of the death of of Pope Francis. We're going to hear from our reporter in Vatican City next. Catholic faithful and world leaders are paying tribute to Pope Francis, who died on Easter Monday at the age of 88. It comes after a respiratory crisis put Francis in hospital for more than a month earlier this year. Pope Francis was well known for his compassion, humility, and focus on global unity. Chris Brown takes a closer look at his legacy and the impact of his leadership.
For Canadians, and especially Indigenous Canadians, Pope Francis may be remembered most for this trip to Alberta in the summer of 2022. I humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against Indigenous peoples, he said, delivering an historic apology for the damage inflicted by church-run residential schools and the evils of colonialism. The emotional moment, long sought by residential school survivors, would be one of the progressive Pope's crowning achievements.
I think from the moment he stepped out on the balcony, we knew that the tectonic plates had shifted.
Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, the first pope ever from the Americas and the first from outside Europe in nearly 1,300 years, carried immense expectations from many demanding change and a more modern institution.
I began to just be fascinated.
Tina Beattie is a theologian and a former professor of Catholic studies in London.
He's lived as humbly as it's possible for a pope to live, and he's put to shame some of the grandiose lifestyles of some of the men in the Vatican. So all in all, that first night was euphoric. Euphoria, of course, doesn't last.
Francis would win accolades for his tough talk condemning sexual abuse in the church. He held summits, met survivors, and made apologies. His messages to gay people also sounded remarkably conciliatory for an institution so resistant to change. He told reporters traveling with him on a flight, "If a person is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge?" Francis used his profile to try to make the world pay attention to the plight of migrants in the Mediterranean, the persecution of Rohingya Muslims, and to heal the deep wounds of civil war in African nations such as South Sudan. But victims of sexual abuse complained Francis's words weren't backed by actions, that abusers continued to be protected.
I think he failed to grasp the real savage problem of the abuse crisis.
As for women, Tina Beattie says Francis saw them in a maternal way, not as equals to men, with too few women appointed to powerful jobs in the church.
But when I hear and read what he says about women, I think, but you haven't listened. You haven't heard anything.
For the first time in history, Francis had to share the Vatican with his predecessor, Emeritus Pope Benedict, who resigned, but whose conservative views clashed with Francis's.
That contributed, of course, to the culture wars and to the sort of schisms that opened up in the church. So I think he made the best of what he must have seen was a very awkward situation.
Francis attempted to create a more inclusive Catholic Church and broaden its appeal, but he also triggered fierce internal debates. His achievements will now either be consolidated or overturned by his successor. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
Pope Francis's death sets in motion a 9-day mourning period, which includes several funeral rituals to honor his legacy. For more on that legacy, the CBC's Megan Williams joins us from Vatican City. So, Megan, what has the reaction to the news been so far?
Well, immense sadness. I mean, this was a pope who spoke to Catholics, of course, but who spoke far beyond the Catholic Church, as we've heard all these tributes from around the world pour in. I was speaking just now in the square with a gay man from California who said that when the Pope gave that initial message shortly after he was elected in 2013, who am I to judge, that it shifted his own experience within his Catholic parish in California. That's just one small example, but he was a pope that really wasn't that interested in enforcing doctrine or spending a lot of energy on cultural wars, but reaching out and including as many people as he could. And even Holy Thursday, he wasn't able this year to wash the prisoners' feet, but he went and visited them. And every time he visited them each year, and this was the first pope to wash the feet of female prisoners, Muslim prisoners, but he would say to them, you know, why is it that you're in prison and I'm not? That he could just as easily have been in their shoes. And he transmitted that message with pretty much everything he did.
Pope Francis, Megan, he apologized for the Catholic Church's role in residential schools in 2022 while he was on a visit to Canada. How significant is reconciliation to this Pope's legacy?
I think it's one of the highlights of his legacy. I think this is a pope who understood the colonialist legacy. He was from South America. It was not only with the residential school situation. He also had a summit on the Amazon. He understood the damage of colonial colonialism, colonial crimes, and he understood why it was so important to make that trip at a time when he wasn't feeling very well. He canceled other international trips, but he made that one, which I think is a reflection of just how acutely and deeply he understood the importance of reconciliation.
How will Pope Francis and his legacy be remembered by the Church?
I think he was a very savvy disruptor. He was a pope who clearly had a vision, who wanted to transform the church. I mean, he announced that vision right after his election. He wanted a poor church for the poor, meaning that he wanted a church that responded to the issues of the day for people who aren't necessarily included, a lot of the people who are overlooked. And I think he was successful in shifting the church in that direction. We'll see what follows it, of course, but he was very savvy in how he did that. And I think we're left with a very different Catholic Church than we had 12 years ago.
Megan, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Megan Williams in Rome. Well, Canada's political leaders also reacted to the death of Pope Francis today. Here is some of what they had to say.
Pope Francis was a voice of moral clarity, spiritual courage, and boundless compassion. He was, in many respects, the world's conscience, never hesitating to challenge the powerful on behalf of the vulnerable. Above all, His Holiness understood and taught that value in the market must never eclipse the values of society. He wrote about the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, reminding us that ecological degradation and social injustice are deeply entwined. During his papal visit to Canada in 2022, his apology on residential schools was a crucial step in moving the Church forward in its journey towards meaningful reconciliation. And one parable he shared in about a decade ago has consistently guided my thinking. He compared humanity to wine, rich, diverse, full of spirit, and the market to grappa, distilled, intense, and at times disconnected. And he called on us to reintegrate human values into our economic lives. He reminded us that markets don't have values, people do. And it's our responsibility to close the gap, to turn that grappa into wine.
Let me first offer my condolences to Catholics all around the world on the loss of Pope Francis. His role is, of course, at the center of the Catholic Church, and there have been countless millions of Catholics and non-Catholics that have been inspired by his leadership in faith and other domains. And our prayers are with all Catholics as they lay to rest the head of the Catholic Church. And we are in solidarity in remembering him and honoring his contributions.
It's a significant loss for the Catholic community, and I want to share my condolences on behalf of all New Democrats. If I could just share a personal reflection on Pope Francis, I was at the apology that the Pope did in Alberta to the Indigenous communities. I want to acknowledge the Indigenous communities and their long advocacy to get that apology. And it was a very powerful moment for many of the leaders that I met, many of the community members who talked about how hearing that apology from the Pope made them feel like they were taking a step forward on their healing journey. Just being acknowledged in that way, recognizing that a harm had happened and that harm was being acknowledged really was powerful. And I think only someone like Pope Francis was able and capable of making that commitment and fulfilling that apology. So I want to acknowledge that.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break here on Power and Politics, but when we come back, more coverage of today's events in the federal election campaign. Don't go away. Welcome back to Power and Politics. It's time now for our daily Power Rankings, our look at who is up and who is down on Canada's political stage. I'm joined today by Carleen Verheyen, a three-time Liberal War Room spokesperson on past campaigns. Amanda Galbraith is a former advisor to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who's in a lot of ads lately. And here with me in the studio, joining us for the first time, Alison Gifford, a former NDP strategist and campaign spokesperson. It's good to see you all. It is day 30 of the federal election campaign, and today, a lot of the party leaders are talking platforms.
We need to build, we need to invest. We need to use scarce dollars on the federal balance sheet to catalyze that investment.
Tomorrow we'll have a platform for all eyes to see, which will bring change to Canada.
We're going to fight hard to get those essential medications. Those are all the most commonly prescribed medications. We're going to get that covered in the first year, and we laid that out in our campaign promises, in our platform.
Okay, those platforms, Alison, this brings us to where you want to start today, because we got the weekend after the debates, we got the Liberals and the NDP, and I think tomorrow we're going to get the Conservative platforms. That's pretty late in an election campaign.
Pretty late. So yeah, my thumbs down is to platforms generally as a democratic tool. I can see their purpose for informing a transition government. I can see it as a benchmark for accountability maybe later, although I do remember seeing democratic reform in a platform once, and nobody seemed people seem to let it go fairly easily a few years down the road. But in terms of a democratic tool, in terms of something that media has time to go through and maybe help voters decipher from the spin or from the language in a platform to help people make an educated decision. Yeah. Dropping it on Easter when everybody's dealing with their kids and grandparents and parents and all these other responsibilities, they got a day off from this campaign. I don't know that that's the best use of anyone's time, and it made me just sort of wonder, what's the use anymore? I think, I think the last couple of elections in Canada, this has started to be a trend. And you're starting to see platforms respond to polling and events in real time. You're starting to see that whoever does put their platform out first is the biggest loser. And so it's actually more strategic to leave it until the end. And so I guess I'm wondering, what's the point? Maybe we should just have policy drops at this point, if this is how all of these parties are going to go about
like the British style of the manifestos, right? Where you roll out a series of policies and the costing and everything comes later. Carleen, I mean, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, if you buy Alison's argument, I think your guy was first, so does that make Mark Carney the biggest loser? He's one of the bigger spenders right now. I mean, what are your thoughts on the platforms?
I've observed a general shift in most national political party campaigns over the last 3 or 4 election cycles. And I think Alison is absolutely right that we are in an era now where platforms are dropping closer and closer to election day. I don't necessarily think that it is a bad thing for democracy or election campaigns, though. And here's why. They are shifting political parties from a big platform reveal as a major day in the campaign narrative to a posture of dropping a single policy announcement, every day every weekday, or at least a few times a week, with a distinct focus on a different topic every day. And so in a way, you're sort of microdosing the platform over the course of the entire election campaign. And by the time you get to the platform reveal, like we saw from the Liberals, the NDP, the Green Party, I think as well this weekend, and the Conservatives tomorrow, we already know 95% of what's in it. So we're not going through a massive document over the weekend and combing through new information for the first time. You could probably actually argue that in a way, this gives voters the chance to have a more substantive discussion about a variety of different topics, because we get to focus on something new every day rather than pouring through a very thick document all at one time.
So, Amanda, what are your thoughts on that? Because for years, we've been asking Pierre Poilievre questions like, what's your climate policy? Wait for the platform. What's this policy? Wait for the platform. Well, we've waited. There's about 5 days left, and millions have already voted, and the platform comes out tomorrow. Do you think it's a mistake to go this late, or how do you view it?
No, I don't think it's a mistake to go this late. I think all the parties, 1 day in advance of us or 2 days behind. It's all basically at the 11th hour. I think what clearly shows is political parties writ large do not see platforms as a useful electoral tool at this point. They're doing it broadly to check a box federally, I think, because to date, no one has not done that yet. I would not be surprised if that's something that happens in the future. Like, for example, when we did the mayoral election in Toronto in 2014, we didn't release a platform for John Tory, and he won with like a very solid amount of votes. I just literally told people, I'm like, print off all of our press releases and staple them together, and that's our platform. So I think that, all like they're nice to have for folks, but people who read them are us. They're not anyone to the point or at home on Easter weekend between kids and grandparents and chocolate in every surface of my house. Am I combing through the Liberal or the Green Party or the NDP platform, with all due respect? Although I'm obviously I've seen the headlines on the Liberal platform. So I think one thing we could argue in theory is that, I think Mark Carney has sort of really towed the line around being sort of more of a centrist Liberal. And that platform to me really spoke to like Justin Trudeau of past, right? Like that platform allegedly has been written for quite a while. The price tag is huge to me, much larger than I would have expected. So I think that has actually caused some issues for the Liberal Party, which they maybe didn't need to have if they didn't put the platform out.
Yeah, look, Carly, just want to get you on that. I mean, the deficit numbers are bigger than, but the spending priorities are very different than a Justin Trudeau spending plan, right? There's a lot of economic infrastructure, defense spending, things that are designed to boost productivity and economic activity. It's not the, I mean, look, it's still a massive deficit. I'm not trying to downplay it, but it's focused in a different kind of bucket than what we saw under Trudeau.
No, I think it's a different approach. And I mean, I think that the Conservatives are right to try to frame it as a Justin Trudeau style platform and associate the deficit with Justin Trudeau, because that is one of the things that will play well for them. Is the closer the link they can draw between Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau, the better off they are. But I think if you actually look at what's in this platform, it's pretty different. The fact that we do see a large amount of spending, though, I think is just reflective of the economic and existential crisis that the country faces. If anybody is suggesting that we don't spend the money to help out workers who are laid off at auto plants or steel plants, I challenge them to take that proposition to the door and talk to voters about that idea. I don't think that Mark Carney is going to face a lot of blowback for his proposal to invest in Canadians and businesses at a time when we're really under threat.
No, but Alison, there is a big structural spend there. Like, well, it's capital. I don't want to say it's structural, because they are reducing kind of the program side as they see it, and more on the capital investment side as they see it, which has Jagmeet Singh saying he's all about cuts and Pierre Poilievre saying he's all about spending, right? So he's kind of getting it from both ends there.
Well, it's good. If you're getting it from both ends, you're probably doing it right. But I do agree that there's more focus on the structural side, and I think that answers that is a bit of an answer to the call for more focus on productivity and in industrial policy generally in Canada.
So Amanda, on that, do you think we're going to see more of that from Poilievre tomorrow? Because they want to do defense spending, they want to stimulate housing, they want to build infrastructure. I don't know how you do all of those things and do the tax cuts without larger deficits, unless they're just really seismic cuts there. How do you think they're going to thread that needle in their plan tomorrow, or are they going to try?
I mean, I haven't seen the platform, so I can't speak to what's in it. What I can say is what they've said to date, right, around cutting, I think, foreign aid funding is a big item that they're looking at. And I think anyone in Ottawa would agree there's some waste at global affairs. So I think they can probably find some spending and savings there. For example, the growth around consultants, right, they've pledged to bring that tab, which has grown exponentially under the Liberals, back down to kind of the 2015 Stephen Harper era numbers, which would be like a substantive amount of money there. So I think they'll have a path to what to them looks like fiscal responsibility. But I think like all of the parties, the big ticket items we've seen roll out throughout the campaign. So I'm not expecting any major surprise tomorrow. A few of us will probably look at the back end of the section and tabble up all the tables and see what makes sense. But what the Conservatives are offering voters, I think they've already kind of rolled out. My expectation is via the platform and going forward for the next week, you'll see a lot of focus on affordability and those sort of issues for Canadians. Yeah,
I'm curious to see. The Liberals have no extra revenue in their forecast from the investments they say they're making in the economic side. We'll see if the Conservatives do have that, because that can change your tables at the back, which is where I'm going to go, Amanda, because I'm that kind of a nerd. All right, Carleen, let's get to your pick. The Liberal here tonight wants to give the Conservatives an up. So I'm just going to bolt myself to the chair. But you go.
This is a bit out of character for me, and don't get me wrong, I'm certainly still rooting for my team here, but I do think I've been watching the Conservative campaign closely over the last number of days with a lot of interest, and I think that, look, my up for tonight is actually the Conservative campaign, because I think that they are perhaps in a stronger position than some people would like to give them credit for. There's no question that the national campaign has had a rough go of it over the course of the campaign, certainly morale-wise. But I do think between the launch of their platform tomorrow, which they're going to get, I think, a good amount of mileage out of, given that every other party has already gone, and they're the last ones to go, they're going to get to talk about what they want to talk about for at least a couple of days in the news cycle. You combine that with the fact that we're heading into get out the vote time with election day coming up on Monday. And this is a party that historically is very, very good at the ground game. I think they may actually be in a stronger position than we think they are. And we'll only know that on election night, of course. But part of the reason I think that is look at the organizational capacity of the parties, okay?
Right.
The Liberal Party of Canada, I think, is in a very different position than it perhaps thought it was going to be 3 months ago. And so you see ridings where the party's organization is stretched very, very thin across a number of ridings, let's say in a major metropolitan area. And you combine that with reasonable levels of NDP support, and you could actually see vote splits where the riding ends up going Conservative only because the Progressive vote is split, and perhaps the Liberals don't have the ground game that they would have liked. And I'd use Burnaby Central actually as an example there, Jagmeet Singh's riding, where he's pulling slightly above the NDP is generally in that area. But the way that the split works out, you may end up with a great Progressive vote, but the Conservative ultimately holds the seat. So in a way, this could also be an up, I think, for traditional NDP voters, because they are the ones who ultimately, I think, are going to hold a lot of power next Monday, because the way that they cast their vote could end up deciding who goes to Ottawa and holds a lot of these seats in battleground ridings.
Well, Alison, there's no question they're in a different position than they were 3 months ago. I mean, they were at like 43 seats 3 months ago. Now they're at 43%. And the Conservatives are polling at Stephen Harper majority levels, and it may not be enough. But, what do you make of this take that they may have an invisible sort of organizational advantage in the final days?
Well, I love Carlene's hug for the Conservatives, although I do see a bit of an anaconda hug there, if I'm being honest.
Be scared, New Democrats?
You're pushing us into that. I mean, if I was a Liberal, I would do it too, but strategic voting is our best friend when we're Liberals. And so saying that the Conservatives might have a little bit more moxie than the polls are letting on would probably scare a soft NDP supporter back to voting Liberal to vote against the Conservatives. To be honest, the Liberals still have a 5% lead, but if you look at the battleground ridings, Vancouver, Metro, Toronto,
the regions are all good for them.
GTA, Quebec, I think that they're still in pretty solid shape, and you can still vote however you like.
Well, there you go. Carlene, if you're trying to scare soft NDP voters, Alison is not one of them. No, Amanda,
it's a genuine take.
Yeah, Amanda, your thoughts on this? Is it a hug or an anaconda hug, as Alison says?
I mean, I like hugs. They're fine. But yeah, when I got the email earlier today from Carlene, because we sent our pics to each other in advance, I almost fell out of my chair. I was like, who wrote this? What is this? So I appreciate
Give yourself
your
some more
commentary.
credit. Wow.
Oh, no, well, I appreciate the love for the Conservative campaign. But yeah, I mean, if I was a Liberal strategist, for sure, I'd be like, don't count out those Conservatives. Make sure you come out and vote, right? Because there's an issue around motivating the vote when the polls are saying where they're at. Can they make sure to keep mobilizing those NDP voters? Because if people start talking majority, which we've been hearing, those NDP lib switchers start switching all the way back. So I think that is certainly a real calculus for the Liberal campaign right now. Obviously, I do think the Conservatives have a healthy ground game. We always have. It's a big part of kind of who we are. We go knock doors, no matter how senior you are in the campaign. That's a big part of it. So I think that's going to be an important piece. And, we'll find out what happens next week, and then this election will be over. And I think all of us will breathe a sigh of relief no matter what the results are.
Oh, yeah, definitely us here in Ottawa as we roll back into a cabinet swearing in and a throne speech and a budget, and then the trade war with Donald Trump, and then he's going to come here for the G7. Oh, it's exhausting just looking ahead of it. Amanda, let's get to your pick. You want to talk about the big lines and the big numbers in voting. We got over 2 million on Friday voted in advance polls.
Yeah, I have a broad just up for Canadians. I think, in taking my partisan hat off, that it is fantastic that we hit record levels on Friday for advance polls. As you mentioned, over 2 million people voted. That's never happened before in the history of the country. We don't know what the numbers for Saturday and Sunday are, or even today, but I think that shows that people are really engaged in this election campaign, that they care. I mean, typically that means change, but now change can mean a lot of things,
Yes.
depending upon what your party is. So it's a weird kind of world out there, but just as somebody who has, practiced in politics, volunteered in politics for 20 plus years, it does my heart good to see that many people going out and voting.
So, Amanda, I just want to ask you about that. The big lineups we saw the morning after the debates, right? It doesn't suggest to me that some wonderful one-liner the night before moved all these people to go. I wonder if it means what we saw in Leger and Angus Reid, that a lot of people were baked in real early and they just wanted to get it over with. How do you view it? I know it's impossible to know for sure, but what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think that certainly a lot of folks have decided how they want to vote. I think people are saying like the undecideds are a lot smaller. Obviously, I think Pierre performed well. We even saw that coming out of the debate. Does that mean people switch their vote? Not necessarily. Carney also, I think, acquitted himself reasonably well. So I think it was mostly people are saying, hey, I'm going to take advantage of the long weekend and get this thing done because I know which way I want to go. And those were pretty motivated voters. Those lineups, bless them, looked a little over, like they looked in the elderly, like boomer category to me, but we'll see what happens. But I'm still, regardless, I think it's a good thing for the country that people are engaged.
No, I don't disagree. And Carleen, I thought the debates themselves were good. The before and after was all a little bit wonky, but I mean, what's your thoughts on what we saw with the voting so far?
Look, it's great to see, especially when we've been in an era for the last number of election cycles where we have seen a lot of low voter turnout, federally and provincially, whether it be because of COVID or other things. Even just thinking of the Ontario provincial election a few months ago where we had really low turnouts. So this is great to see. Just to go back to my anaconda for a second. I do think, and I'm truly being genuine here. I think that there is a possibility that a lot of Canadians had perhaps looked at the numbers and read the tea leaves and thought that the outcome's a foregone conclusion. I don't need to get out and vote. And so seeing that people still took the time to vote anyway and put down their views is a good sign for our country. I'm here out west with my family, and over Easter dinner on the weekend, we talked a lot about politics. Probably won't surprise you to know I'm not necessarily in a lot of company as a Liberal voter out here, but everybody talked in universal agreement about one thing, and that was their commitment to actually voting in this election. And my whole family went out to vote today at the polls. It was really warm and fuzzy and great. I don't think they all voted for the person I voted for, but we did it. So it's great to see.
Alison, it's very difficult to look at this election and look at the stakes of this election. And the Conservatives, who were the big frontrunners, they still have a very motivated base and a level of support in the high 30s, right? So to look at this election and all of these things and not vote if you're in any way engaged in civic society.
Right. I think it's clear that voters are galvanized and they're enthusiastic. If I think about when this has happened before in Canadian history, it's usually when there's an existential issue. And 88. That, right, like 88 was the NAFTA election. The Quebec referendum had 95%. And I think 88 was about 76%. So if you look at both of those instances, there's an existential question, there's sovereignty at play, there's the future of a state or nation state at play. That might, if I was going to read the tea leaves and I was going to look at history, I think I would see that as a big motivator. But change is also a motivator. It was a motivator for Trudeau's win in 2015. And if you want to go back to Diefenbaker, people wanted to, solidify a solid government, but there always is a thing, right? I think that sovereignty and those existential questions really, really do motivate people.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to see where the voter turnout is as we get over that. So, I think the German election, which had a whole bunch of issues at play there, they're at 83% or something. I think that's going to be tough to do. But the number starting with a 7, I mean, that would be pretty good in an election like that. All right, we're going to end it all with one big anaconda hug here for the panel. Carleen, Amanda, and Allison, thank you all very much. I'm David Cochrane. Thank you all for watching Power and Politics. Remember, CBC News Network is now free to watch until May 5th, so find us through your cable provider or wherever you stream CBC. You can also watch Power and Politics live on YouTube for the remainder of the federal election campaign. But that is it for tonight. We'll be back in 22 hours. Hannah Mansing Tonight is next, right here on CBC News Network.